had been a long day. Delivering pizzas across the city wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I had driven through all sorts of neighborhoods, some affluent with gated homes, others less fortunate with streets that felt more like mazes than actual roads. But I'd grown used to it. After all, people are people, and everyone likes pizza. That night, just as I was about to clock out, the phone buzzed. Another order. My heart sank when I saw the address. It was on the outskirts of town, far from the usual routes. I didn't recognize the street name, and it wasn't a good feeling. I hesitated but decided to go. A delivery meant a tip, and a tip meant gas money for the week. The drive was long, the city lights fading behind me as I entered the rural edge of town. The streets grew narrower, the houses fewer, and before I knew it, I was surrounded by nothing but open fields. My GPS claimed I was nearing the destination, but there was nothing. No house, no mailbox, just an empty expanse of tall grass swaying in the wind. I circled the area for 30 minutes, frustration mounting. The address didn't exist. Cursing under my breath, I decided to turn back. It wasn't worth the trouble, and I wasn't about to waste any more of my night chasing ghosts. As I drove back, something hit my car, hard. It sounded like a rock, a sharp thud against the rear panel. I slowed down, scanning the area with my headlights, but there was nothing, just that endless field stretching into the dark. I convinced myself it was debris, maybe something kicked up by the wind. But a few moments later, another thud hit my car, this time on the roof. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. The unease I'd felt earlier was now gnawing at me. When it happened a third time, I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching against the gravel road. My pulse pounded in my ears as I grabbed the flashlight from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car. The air was cold, the kind that bites at your skin and makes you hyper-aware of every sound. I shone the flashlight around, illuminating the tall grass that surrounded me. The scratches on the car's paint confirmed something had hit it, but there was no sign of rocks or anything that could explain it. I was about to shrug it off and get back in the car when I heard it. A loud rustling, like someone or something moving through the field. The beam of my flashlight darted to the noise. About 30 meters away, the rustling stopped abruptly. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. That's when I felt it, a presence. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew something was out there. Then, he stepped into the light. He looked like he hadn't seen civilization in years. Filthy clothes hanging off his bony frame, matted hair, and wild, unblinking eyes that bore into me. One of his hands was behind his back, as if hiding something. "What do you want? Did you order a pizza?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was shaking like a leaf. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring. And then I realized the rustling wasn't coming from just him. It was all around me. Panic set in as I saw more figures emerging from the field, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. I didn't wait to see how many there were. The man started moving toward me, his steps quick and deliberate. I fumbled with the car door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. It was jammed. "Come on," I whispered, tugging frantically. Finally, the door gave way, and I threw myself inside, slamming it shut just as the man reached the car. His face appeared in the window for a brief moment, twisted in anger, before I hit the gas. The tires spun in the gravel before finding traction, and I sped away, the figures vanishing into the darkness behind me. My heart didn't stop pounding until I saw the lights of the city again. When I pulled into the pizzeria, I was shaking so hard I could barely get out of the car. "What happened to you?" my boss asked, frowning at my pale face and trembling hands. "That address, it doesn't exist," I managed to say, "and I think I was attacked." He gave me a strange look, the kind that said he didn't believe me but didn't want to argue. "Go home, get some rest." I didn't argue. I needed to get out of there, to be somewhere safe. A few days later, I saw something on the news that made my blood run cold. An elderly man had gone missing near the area where I'd been that night. The search party had found nothing, not even footprints. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I didn't tell anyone what had happened to me. Who would believe it? But I knew. I knew what was out there in those fields. Thank God no more orders came from that address. I don't think I'd survive another trip. I rarely have scary dreams, but when I do, they are long remembered in my memory. There's one dream in particular, though, that I'll never forget. Even thinking about it now sends chills down my spine. It wasn't just the dream itself that was horrifying. It was what happened after I woke up. In the dream, I was running. I don't remember where I started, but I was in a long, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The air was cold, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced behind me. That's when I saw him, my father, or at least something that looked like him. It wasn't him, not really. His face was twisted and wrong, his eyes completely black like deep, endless pits. Thick, black liquid oozed from his mouth, staining his chin and dripping onto his shirt. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, his head tilting slightly to one side as though he were studying me, deciding what to do next. I ran faster, but no matter how quickly I moved, he stayed right behind me, silent and steady. I couldn't scream, couldn't call for help. My legs felt like they were moving through water, sluggish and heavy. I don't know how long I kept running, but it felt like an eternity. Then I woke up. My heart was racing, and I was drenched in sweat. The room was dark and eerily quiet. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just a dream, but the unease lingered, sticking to me like a second skin. I decided to go to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and calm down. As I stepped into the hallway, I froze. My father was standing there, blocking the way. His head tilted slightly, just like in my dream. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice low and slow. My stomach twisted, and my legs felt like jelly. His face, it was the same as in the dream, the same black eyes, the same black liquid seeping from his mouth. My heart stopped. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then I screamed. The sound ripped through the silence, jarring me awake, this time for real. I was sitting up in bed, clutching my blanket, my throat raw from the scream. My father burst into the room, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, rushing to my side. I flinched away from him, pressing myself against the headboard. He stopped, startled, and reached for the light switch. The room flooded with warm, yellow light, and I stared at him, my breath hitching in my chest. His eyes were normal. His mouth was clean. There was no black liquid, no empty pits staring back at me. He was just my dad. I'm fine," I stammered, though my voice shook. He looked at me for a long moment before nodding and leaving the room, though I could tell he was still worried. But I wasn't fine. I couldn't shake the terror, couldn't convince myself it had just been a dream. The image of his face, those black eyes, that oozing liquid, was burned into my mind. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, every creak and shadow in the house making me jump. It wasn't until the sun rose, painting the room in soft morning light, that I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But even then, the fear didn't fully leave me. I kept glancing at my father throughout the day, half expecting to see those black eyes staring back at me. It was only later that I learned there was a name for what had happened to me. A false awakening. A dream within a dream, so vivid and real that it feels like waking life. But knowing the term doesn't make it any less terrifying. What still haunts me most is the way the dream bled into reality. I've heard people say that dreams are just your mind playing tricks on you, But what if they're more than that? Even now, I can't look at my father in the dark without feeling a shiver run down my spine. I know it's irrational, but part of me can't help but wonder, what if in some way it was real? And I wonder if I'll ever truly wake up.